She said, "If you help me, I'll give you everything they took from you. Everything. But you have to trust me completely, starting right now." My name is Marcus Webb, and 4 months ago, I was standing in the parking lot of my own company, watching my business partner of 6 years drive away in a car I helped pay for, with my fiancée in the passenger seat, not looking back. I didn't chase them. I didn't call out. I just stood there with my keys in my hand, and the kind of silence in my chest that doesn't feel like quiet. It feels like something structural has given way, like a floor you didn't know you were standing on has just disappeared. Her name was Claire. We'd been together 3 years. We were supposed to get married in the spring. The venue was booked. Her dress was already altered. My mother had already bought her plane ticket from Phoenix. His name was Derek. We'd built Caliber Digital from nothing, a 2-man web development shop, out of my apartment, that had grown into a 12-person agency with real clients, real revenue, and a lease on actual office space with windows. I trusted him the way you trust someone you've gone through hard things with. The way you trust someone who's seen you fail and stayed anyway. I found out the way nobody should find out about anything a text meant for someone else. Claire had used my phone to check a map, because hers was dead, and when she handed it back, a message came through from Derek that said, "Is he home? I'm outside." She didn't know I'd seen it. I didn't say anything. I just watched. I watched for 2 weeks, quietly. The way you watch something you're hoping will prove itself wrong. It didn't. What I saw instead was worse than I expected. And what came after that was worse than what I saw. But that's not where this story ends. This story ends with a woman I'd never met knocking on my apartment door on a Tuesday morning, holding a folder thick enough to use as a weapon, and saying 6 words that changed everything. I know what Derek really did. Her name was Simone. She was Derek's ex-wife. They'd been divorced 14 months before I ever met her. And Derek had never once mentioned she existed. Not once in 6 years. No photo, no story, no reference. As far as I knew, Derek had never been married. That was the first thing she told me standing in my doorway. And I remember thinking, if he hid an entire marriage, what else did he hide? I let her in, because something in the way she stood there straight-backed, no apology in her posture told me she hadn't come to fall apart on my couch. She'd come to work. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, opened the folder, and started from the beginning. Derek had done this before. Not the cheating though, that too, but the other thing. The thing I didn't have a name for yet. He had a pattern, Simone explained, of embedding himself in something someone else built, learning it completely, and then restructuring it quietly so that his name was load-bearing and the original owner's name was not. He'd done it to her brother's landscaping business 8 years ago. The brother had walked away with almost nothing and a debt he hadn't understood he'd signed for. Derek had walked away with a client list and a reputation. With me, he'd had 6 years to be patient. I looked at the documents she laid out, vendor contracts renegotiated quietly over the past 18 months. Derek's signature alone, mine removed from the approval chain through an amendment I didn't remember signing. A line of business credit opened in the company name with Derek listed as sole officer. My title on the incorporation documents, which I hadn't looked at since year 2, had been changed from co-founder and co-director to creative consultant. There was a date stamp on the amendment. I had been on a client trip to Denver. Derek had been in the office alone for 3 days. I felt the room tilt slightly. "You need to understand," I said. "I built that company." "I know," Simone said. "That's why I'm here." She looked at me carefully. "He's going to push you out inside of 60 days. He has a buyer lined up, a firm out of Atlanta. The deal is already being structured. Your name isn't in it." "My fiancée," I started. She stopped me. "Claire isn't a coincidence." She said it simply, not cruelly. "Derek needed you distracted and emotionally destabilized while the paperwork finalized. Claire was introduced to your circle through Derek's networking event 14 months ago. I have the invite list." She slid a single page across the table. There was Claire's name, printed clearly, listed as Derek's guest. I hadn't known that. I thought we'd met at a rooftop party through mutual friends. We had met at a rooftop party. It just hadn't been accidental. I sat with that for a long moment. The specific, surgical coldness of it. Then I asked the question I needed to ask. "Why are you helping me?" Simone folded her hands on the table. "Because he took something from my brother that my brother never recovered from. And because the only way to stop someone like Derek is to let him think the trap is still open while you're already closing it from the other side." She looked at me steadily. I've been building this case for 2 years, but I needed someone with standing. Someone currently inside the damage. She paused. That's you. She wasn't asking me to trust her emotionally. She was asking me to trust the logic. And the logic was sitting right there on my kitchen table in a folder with dates and signatures and amounts. What do you need from me? I asked. Keep going to the office. She said. Don't change anything. Don't let him know you've spoken to me. And give me access to your original incorporation documents, the ones from year 1, before the amendments. I did have those. In a fireproof box in my closet, untouched for years, because I'd never had a reason to open it. That box, as it turned out, was the most important thing I owned. We met every other day for the next 3 weeks. Not at my apartment at a diner 20 minutes outside the city where nobody from my life would walk in. Simone would arrive before me, already with coffee, already with notes. She didn't waste time on small talk. She wasn't cold, exactly. She was concentrated. The way someone is concentrated when they've been working on something alone for a very long time and finally have a collaborator. I learned things about my own company I hadn't known. The credit line Derek had opened was $380,000. He'd drawn $210,000 of it already, routed through a vendor account belonging to a company that didn't appear to have any real operations, no website, no registered address, just a name and a bank account. The company's registered agent was a man whose name appeared in 2 other Derek-adjacent LLCs from his past. Derek wasn't just cheating me. He was extracting the company's value before selling the shell. The buyer in Atlanta didn't know that, or didn't know the full picture. They were purchasing what they believed was a healthy 12-person agency with clean books. They were going to get a gutted operation with a fraudulent credit line attached to it, and my name still on enough legacy paperwork to be visible would be in the wreckage. Simone had a contact. A former colleague from a compliance background who now worked adjacent to a federal financial crimes unit. Not a direct line, but a real one. She'd been building toward this referral for months. But she needed one more thing, a clear record of me, as original founder, not having authorized the amendments to the incorporation documents. That meant handwriting analysis on the signature they'd used. A signature that was not mine. I hired a documents examiner. Through a lawyer, Simone recommended someone outside my usual network, someone Derek had no reason to know. The analysis took 10 days. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signature on the co-founder amendment was not consistent with my handwriting across 17 comparison samples. It was a practiced approximation. Good enough to pass a glance, not good enough to pass scrutiny. Meanwhile, I went to the office every day. I sat in meetings. I responded to client emails. I watched Derek across the conference table and kept my face neutral. He was relaxed. Whatever he was reading from me, it was working. He thought I was exactly where he needed me to be, hurt over Claire, distracted, slowly losing interest in the business I'd built. He even had a conversation with me, genuinely sympathetically delivered, about whether I'd considered taking a step back for a while. Just to recharge, he said. You've given so much to this place. I told him I'd think about it. He smiled the way someone smiles when they think they've won already. Claire called me once during those 3 weeks. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she was warm and slightly nervous and said she just wanted to make sure I was okay. She said she felt terrible about how things had happened. She said she hoped we could be civil. I said, of course, and kept my voice even. And after we hung up, I sat quietly for a while thinking about the invite list with her name on it. Thinking about 14 months. Thinking about all the moments I'd believed were random, that had in fact been placed. It's a particular kind of grief. Finding out that something you thought was yours was actually a performance put on for your consumption. It doesn't feel like heartbreak. It feels like a room you lived in turning out to be a stage set. Walls that don't go anywhere. A door that was always painted on. Simone noticed I was quieter than usual at our next meeting. You're allowed to be angry, she said. I don't need you to be a machine. I looked at her. Are you angry? She was quiet for a moment. I was. For a long time. Now I just want it finished. I understood that. I was starting to understand it, in real time, the way fury, if you hold it long enough and direct it precisely enough, stops feeling like heat and starts feeling like clarity. The documents examiner's report went to the lawyer. The lawyer filed a preliminary complaint with the state attorney general's office and simultaneously flagged the matter to Simone's federal contact, along with a 40-page packet we had spent the better part of a week organizing. The original incorporation documents, the unauthorized amendments, the fraudulent credit draws, the shell company registration, the connection to Derek's prior pattern with Simone's brother's business. Simone had advised me, don't report it until they move. Let them believe the sale is proceeding. That's when they'll rush, and that's when they'll make mistakes. She was right again. Derek sent me a formal email 8 days later. Calm, professional, generous in tone. He wanted to discuss a strategic transition of my role. There was an offer attached a buyout number for my equity stake that was less than 30 cents on the dollar, based on the agency's actual revenue. He framed it as looking out for me. He used the phrase fresh start 4 times in 3 paragraphs. I forwarded it to the lawyer before I replied. The lawyer said, perfect. Don't negotiate. Just say you need time to review. I replied that I needed time to review. 3 days after that, the Atlanta firm's due diligence team made contact with our bookkeeper, a woman named Patricia who had been with the company since year 3 and who I had quietly spoken to 2 weeks prior. I hadn't told her everything, just enough. That some financial irregularities had come to my attention, and that if anyone from outside the company asked questions about the books, she should let me know immediately. Patricia called me within an hour of their contact. That afternoon, I made the call to Simone's federal contact directly, with the lawyer on the line. We had everything. The contact said she'd been watching Derek's name surface in adjacent inquiries for 18 months. She said, "You've just given us what we needed to move." I didn't feel triumphant when I hung up. I felt something quieter than that. Like a long-held breath finally let go. The investigation moved faster than I expected. 6 days later, Derek was served at the office. I was not there when it happened. The lawyer had advised me to work remotely that day, but Patricia called me and described it. 2 people in plain clothes. A sealed document. Derek's face going very still in a way she said she'd never seen on him before. He'd asked to call his attorney, and they'd allowed it, and then they'd walked him out of the building quietly. No spectacle, no scene. The Atlanta deal collapsed the same afternoon. The buyer's counsel had apparently already had concerns about certain disclosure inconsistencies. Derek's removal was enough for them to invoke a material adverse change clause and walk. Claire was harder to reach, legally. Her involvement was subtler, no signatures, no financial instruments in her name, but the documented 14-month coordination with Derek, combined with her access to my personal schedule and routines during a critical period of the document manipulation, was enough for the investigators to name her as a co-conspirator in the criminal complaint. She hired a defense attorney within 48 hours of Derek's arrest, which told its own story. They were charged together. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Derek faced 11 counts. Claire faced 6. The trial was 8 months later. I testified for 4 hours. Simone testified for 2. The documents examiner testified. Patricia testified. The shell company's paper trail was walked through, transaction by transaction, on a screen in front of the jury. Derek's defense tried to argue that the incorporation amendments had been done with my verbal consent, that informal agreements existed between partners that weren't always documented. The jury took 2 days. Derek, guilty on 9 of 11 counts. Claire, guilty on 4 of 6. Sentencing was 60 days after that. Derek received 8 years. Claire received 3, with conditions. I stood on the courthouse steps afterward, and the afternoon was very ordinary traffic noise, someone's dog, a cloud moving across the sun, and I thought about the parking lot 4 months before, and the silence in my chest that had felt like structural failure. It didn't feel like that anymore. Simone was standing a few feet away. She'd worn the same kind of expression through the entire trial that she'd worn that morning at my kitchen table, focused, contained, working. When the verdict had come in, she'd closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. That was all. Outside the courthouse, I stood next to her, and we watched the cars for a while. "Your brother," I said. "Does he know?" She nodded. "He cried," she said. "First time in a long time." I looked at her. "What happens to you now?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I don't know," she said. "I've been pointed at this for 2 years." She paused. "I think I forgot what it felt like to not be pointed at something." "I know that feeling," I said. She looked at me. "Yes, I think you do." We stood there a little longer. The city was doing what cities do in the late afternoon. Indifferent and continuous. And neither of us had anywhere we needed to be urgently. "I have a company to rebuild," I said eventually. The amendments had been voided by court order. My original equity position was restored, the fraudulent credit line was being unwound, and there was a separate civil claim proceeding against Derek for the $210,000 already drawn. Caliber Digital was still standing battered, reduced, but with its original foundation intact, because the original foundation had been in a fireproof box in my closet the whole time. Simone almost smiled. You still have the team? Most of them, I said. Patricia didn't go anywhere. A few others. That's enough to start with, she said. We walked toward the parking structure, not quite together, not quite separate. At the elevator, she stopped. I want to say something, she said, and for the first time since she'd knocked on my door she looked slightly uncertain about the words she was choosing. I came to you because I needed someone with legal standing. That was true. But I also came because I looked into you before I knocked on that door. I wanted to know if you were the kind of person this was worth doing for. I waited. You were, she said simply. Then she pressed the elevator button and looked straight ahead, and I understood that was the end of that particular sentence. We didn't exchange numbers that day. She had my lawyer's contact, and I had the business card she'd handed me at our very first meeting, plain white. Just her name and an email address. It sat in the same drawer as my original incorporation documents, the ones that had saved everything. About 6 weeks after sentencing, I was in the office late, just me and the sound of the city outside the windows we'd worked so hard to be able to afford, and I sent her an email. Nothing elaborate. I told her the civil claim had advanced, and that the first month's revenue had come in stronger than projected, and that I'd hired 2 new people. I said, I thought you should know the foundation held. She replied the next morning. 3 sentences. Good. Your instincts were right about the team. And for what it's worth, the door you didn't close on a stranger was the thing that made all of it possible. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and looked out at the city for a while. At the ordinary and continuous life of it. All those windows with their lights going on as the evening came in. And I thought about foundations, about the things you build quietly over years that you don't know you're going to need until the floor gives way. And about the people who show up, sometimes, when it does. Folder in hand, straight-backed, ready to work. Not asking you to trust them blindly. Just asking you to look at what's on the table and decide if the logic is sound. It was. It is. And so I kept going.